not a lot of support for the budget. Of course, it's a long way from an election, but the hit is very big. One person who's going to have to perhaps take some of the coalface complaints is the Federal Assistant Minister for Social Services, Senator Mitch Fifield. He joins me in the studio in 1 second.
702.
702.
702. 702 ABC Sydney. Mornings with Linda Mottram.
Yes, it's not quite going swimmingly, but budgets rarely do, I suppose. But this one is delivering a hefty whack to the federal government. Mitch Fifield is here, Victorian Senator and Federal Assistant Minister for Social Services. Morning to you, Mitch.
Good morning, Linda.
You wouldn't have been a very happy man looking at those poll results this morning in the papers. Abandoned, says the Sydney Morning Herald. It's not much better in the Murdoch press. Well,
Linda, we were elected to make difficult decisions. We're not in this to win any popularity contests.
Where have I heard that before?
And I don't
never said by a politician
never.
before.
But look, I don't think anyone could accuse us of going down the populist path with this budget. It's important to remember, Linda, that we inherited a situation where we're paying $1 billion each and every month on interest.
We've all talked about this budget emergency notion that you guys have put out there, which you can't find an economist that supports that idea, and then suddenly we get a budget that breaks so many of the promises that your leader made. It's not, it could have been so much easier than this on you.
Well, I know people say, look, there isn't a budget emergency, but we do have a very serious fiscal challenge that if we did nothing, we would have $667 billion in gross debt within 10 years' time.
Okay, so why not tackle superannuation tax breaks, for example? This has all been hashed over, and I still don't understand why. I think a lot of listeners still don't understand why you didn't hit that big end more than the bottom end, because all of the economists I talk to say this is a regressive budget.
Well, we made it clear coming into the election that we weren't going to tinker with superannuation because Australians have had a gutful of super being tinkered with every 5 minutes.
Okay, we managed to break a lot of other promises.
But what we've done is we've put forward a budget where we believe that every part of the community makes a contribution. And the reason we're doing this, Linda, and certainly from my point of view, is so that we can ensure that we can sustain a social safety net into the future. And I'll just take my portfolio area of disabilities. We are delivering the National Disability Insurance Scheme in full. Now, at full rollout, that will be a $22 billion scheme. Now, you can't afford and you can't sustain something like an NDIS unless you cut your cloth accordingly. Now, we don't see economic policy and social policy as alternatives. To sustain a good social policy, you've got to have a good economic policy. Okay. And at the heart of a good economic policy is a good budget policy.
Okay, a good budget policy that should have hit everybody equally. The economists say universally, pretty much as far as I can tell anyway, that this is a regressive budget. That is not sustaining good social policy, is it?
Well, I think it is sustaining good social policy because unless we cut our cloth, we won't be in a position where we can fund pensions into the future, where we can fund good schools and good hospitals into the future. That's why we're taking these difficult decisions so that we can continue to fund the core business of government, which from my point of view is schools and hospitals and extra support for people who face challenges for reasons beyond their control, like people with significant disabilities.
Do you dispute that this is a regressive budget?
Look, it is a difficult budget.
No, regressive is the term particularly.
Well, people can choose their own words.
I mean, the numbers have been put out there. The economists have crunched the numbers. It is clearly hitting people in the lower end of the spectrum having a harder time making a living and keeping families together, hitting them much harder than the top end of town. It's clearly regressive, isn't it? You'd agree?
I think every part of the community is making their contribution. And yes, it's difficult. And we would have preferred not to have to take the decisions that we have. But the do-nothing scenario isn't an option. And we haven't yet heard from our political opponents what their alternative plan is.
Okay, years out from an election, this is your budget. There were other options. I mean, given the number of promises that were ditched in this budget, why not also ditch the promise on, for example, superannuation? There are others we could name as well. You did have other options.
Well, Linda, we have kept faith with the Australian people, with the agenda that we took to the last election.
It's a bit disingenuous, isn't it?
Well, no, Linda, I don't think it is. We made it clear at the election that we were going to stop the boats, which we've made a good fist at, that we were going to repair the budget, that we were going to abolish the carbon tax, and those are the things that we're addressing. Now, it would be of great assistance to people's household incomes if the opposition would, for instance, back us in repealing the carbon tax. We've got a clear mandate for that. It would help the average household by about $550 a week. So that's important.
But your average household's going to lose a lot more than that. I mean, some households losing...
$550 a year.
Yes, a lot of households losing thousands. I mean, again, a regressive budget, and yet you say you're committed to good social policy. The two don't marry up.
No, I think they do, Linda, and that's the problem with our political opponents, is that they present good social policy and good economic policy as alternatives. It's a false dichotomy. You can't have a good social policy with the best will in the world unless you have a good economic policy, and you need to have a budget that prioritises and focuses on those things that are more important than others, such as pensions, such as health, such as education, such as a national disability insurance scheme.
And a lot of people questioning whether you are seriously committed to maintaining what has been the agreed social position in this country. And it's always up for debate, but people saying we didn't have a debate. We don't recall having a debate about whether we want fundamental change to the idea of universality in, education, healthcare, those areas. Are you committed to maintaining that principle of universality?
Well, it is a universal scheme, the Medicare scheme. What we're asking is for people to make a modest contribution. There are appropriate safety nets in place for concession holders and young people who have 10 visits a year. So what we're doing, we see, is underpinning that social safety net, is underpinning that social contract that has been so important in Australia.
How can that be the case when the state governments are having $80 billion ripped out of health and education funding by this budget over coming years, and they say they can't fill that hole? They have nowhere else to get that money from. How can seems again the two ends of this discussion don't meet.
Well, we made clear before the election that we were going to continue over the forward estimates the significant increases in spending in health and in education. But we also made clear that beyond that forward estimates period, the previous government had an unrealistic and unsustainable growth for health and education spending. And we said we were going to bring that back to a more realistic growth. And that's what we're going to do. So no one should think for a second that spending on health or education is going to be reduced or that it's been cut. It's not. It's still going to increase. It's still going to increase significantly. It's just not going to increase beyond the forward estimates at the same rate, at the pie in the sky rate that the previous government had.
Okay, but Premier's saying that, the Premier of this state saying that 300 hospital beds will have to go as of 1st of July. I mean, that is a real cut at the coalface where real people have to deal with the health system.
Well, what we're talking about are the numbers beyond what was the forward estimates coming into the last election, now the first out year in this particular budget. We're not making a change to those arrangements before that period. I think what the Premier might be referring to are concession payments which we've been making to the states, which will stop on the 1st of July.
But real money that is used to maintain the health and education services that you say you're committed to maintain, and yet suddenly a black hole.
Well, it's not a black hole. Spending on health and education is going to increase. That is a fact. But we couldn't sustain the pie in the sky, unsupported growth beyond the forward estimates that the previous government had in their numbers. It wasn't realistic, it wasn't sustainable. The dollars weren't there, and the dollars aren't there for that.
Okay, just quickly on your particular area, and you were mentioning the disability insurance scheme there. Mark is on the line in Sutherland. I might need you to just pop those headphones on. Hopefully, there's a little volume button there if you need to adjust it. Mark, you have a question for the minister?
Yes, Linda, thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'd like to ask Mitch. I last year had applied for the Employment Assistance Fund because I'm vision impaired. I can't use a normal turntable. So I've applied for a special turntable under the scheme because I'm vision impaired and work in audio archiving, like preserving old records.
Oh, so when you say turntable, you mean literally a turntable for playing vinyl records?
Yeah.
They still exist.
They do. I have one. Yeah. Anyway, go on, Mark. You need a special one.
Yeah, I need a special one. So anyway, I demonstrated the clear proof that I needed such a thing to the appropriate documentation, was denied the funding the first time around, went through a appeal, was still denied, and then ultimately wrote a letter off to Senator Fifield and was still denied. And in an era where we're sort of promoting the need for the disability, I find this rather just so wrong, so wrong.
Okay.
And what do I do now? Because I can't work because I'm being denied this equipment.
Okay. Mitch?
The Employment Assistance Fund is an important measure to help people who have some extra challenges but need some particular work supports to get into the workforce. Obviously, I don't know your particular circumstances, but if you want to provide those to the producers here, then I'm very happy to take a look. But the good news is in this budget, the NDIS is going to be rolled out in full. That will provide some important supports, non-income supports for people. And if you get the daily living supports that you need, as you quite rightly point out, you're in a much better position to contemplate being in the workforce, and that's what we want to see happen.
Okay, Mark, just put you on hold, mate. Leave your details there and we'll forward them. Senator Mitch Fifield is with me, Federal Assistant Minister for Social Services. Just finally, it's 9:30, so we've got to go to the news shortly, but Jay Weatherill, South Australian Premier, said on the weekend that senators have to decide where their interests lay. Do they serve the interests of the states that elected them, or do they serve the interests of the Abbott government? Where do you stand on that?
Well, whether you be a senator or a member of the House, you're elected to represent your communities, but you're also elected to take collective decisions in the national interest. So in my case, as a senator for Victoria, I argue strongly for the East-West Link, as I know my New South Wales colleagues argue strongly for WestConnex. But you're also a member of the National Parliament and you've got to take decisions in the national interest. And what we're doing doesn't target or single any particular state in this budget. We're asking all jurisdictions to make a contribution to building a better and stronger Australia.
Well, there's a lot of dispute about that. There's a lot of angry texts coming in, I can tell you. They're flooding in. But we need to move on to the news. Thanks for spending some time with us today, Mitch.
Thanks, Linda.
Cheers. Senator Mitch Fifield, Federal Assistant Minister for Social Services. 1300 222 702 if you want to join the conversation this morning. Let's quickly get the weather with Simon Lewis at the Bureau. Kind of warm, warmer even, I think. Simon, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Linda.
It's kind of like summer's come back again.
Yeah, it's been quite a warm month so far. I think we got up to almost 25 yesterday, and we're looking at a similar temperature today. No rainfall, just pretty few patches of cloud around. We could even get a little bit warmer today. It's not out of the question to get up to 26.
Goodness me.
So
Yeah.
it is. It's like a late burst of summer.
It is, isn't it? It is.
In fact, we've only had one maximum below the average for May so far this month, so that's a pretty warm spell.
And the evenings are quite warm again too, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. We got down to 13.1 last night, and I think we're going for something similar for tomorrow. 14.
Okay.
Yep.
And no end in sight?
We've got a little weak sort of change coming through on Wednesday. So there is the chance of a shower on Wednesday, but probably a pretty slight chance, and mostly just near the coast. Really not much rain in it at all. And that might just drop the temperatures back a little bit, probably down to around 21, maybe 22. And then, yeah, we're right back into the warmer conditions for Thursday and Friday with mostly sunny days.
Okay. All right. Well, enjoy it while we can, I suppose.
Yeah, it'll turn eventually.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, inevitable. Simon, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.